much. And Katie Arrington, everybody, the mother of CMMC.
So I am Katie Arrington. If you don't know me, I am performing the duties of the Chief Information Officer here at the Department of Defense. I am at NATO right now for the DPC, basically the Cyber Committee for NATO. And it couldn't be more timely. This journey that we have been on together, and those of you who have been on it with us for I don't even like to bring up how long it's been, but I think we're at the 5-year mark of this effort, and she's going live. So I want everyone to understand that first and foremost. We in the Department of Defense are not changing our narrative. I am the individual in charge of what requirements are needed for the defense industrial base. The NIST 171, whatever rev we're going to be on, I think we're on rev 3, she'll continue to change and grow because the requirement for cyber is a changing and growing thing. So CMMC, what she looks like today, may not look like the same in 5 years from now, but that's going to be okay. This program started off with, and I'm here at NATO, and this is if you haven't heard me before, I always go full circle. So we're going to start with compliance and standards. And I'm here at NATO with all of our 31 allies, and we're discussing about standards. And this wonderful human being from the UK gets on stage yesterday. Actually, we're at NATO, so we're in the little, it's in a stadium for NATO on the first day. And the second day, you're actually in that cool NATO room where you've got the ear mics on, listening to the translators. And his name is Rich Martin. And he said, standards are only as good as those who are compliant to them. Otherwise, they're just paper. And I'm sitting there, and NATO is talking, we are talking about the CMMC at NATO. We are talking about what it looks like to be part of our defense industrial base. It wasn't the primary sector of this conference because this is a cyber conference, but it absolutely was brought up. And it was one of those moments where you go, that's why I did what I did. That's why we started this whole thing, because a standard, the NIST standard, is only as good as those of you that are actually compliant to it. And we know for fact certain that the CMMC never was about a check in the box that, because we had that with self-attestation. We currently have that, right? That you're checking the box and saying, I'm going to do this, and someday, sometime I'll get to it. We need the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, to be as good as the Department of Defense every single day, because we don't fight wars alone. We fight the war with the Department of the Defense Industrial Base. And we fight it with our ally partners. We fight it with our Five Eye partners, our trilats, our bilats. That's how we defend. And I would say that the CMMC is probably the single most effective deterrence to war that I've ever seen. And why I say that is because the best defense for a non-kinetic event to happen, a kinetic event to happen, is to have companies, militaries, able to thwart off non-kinetic events. And I'll say things like, cyber attacks are one thing, right? But IP theft is just as important. And why I say that, this all started with President Barack Obama in 2014. And if you all don't know the history of why the CMMC is, it started off with the F-35 of all the things that the defense contractor that had the prime contract on that was, had CUI going through the supply chain, and somehow China ended up with the exact drawings of the original F-35 to maintain the same canopy flaw. And we realized how vulnerable the DIB really was. And that's, the president created an executive order that said that we needed to create a NIST standard for non-federal, based off of the 53, the NIST 800 171, NIST 800-53. And that's how the NIST was born on the non-federal side, the 171. And back in the day, 2017, everybody had to have it in their contracts and everybody was checking the box. We were still bleeding data loss, disruption, IP loss, ransomware, bleeding money. And that's how the CMMC started. Was the standard was only as good as the piece of paper was written on if our partners weren't compliant to it. So that's how the journey started. And CMMC, when we envisioned it, never was about the check in the box. It was culture, right? And this has become a cultural thing. And that's what we were talking about at NATO, that there's been this massive cultural shift from where we were even 10 years ago to where we are today, 5 years ago to where we are today. It's because cyber is not a check in the box. It's a cultural thing. And if you don't have the culture of cybersecurity, then you're going to lose. And I don't want to pick at an open wound, right? But if you were paying attention to Telefónica in Spain yesterday, Spain had a national outage of telecoms to include their version of 911 throughout the entirety country of Spain. Why? Because they had a misconfiguration in a patch. Sound familiar? Does anyone remember CrowdStrike? That's a cultural thing. Processes, policy, tools, education, and training, right, are policy, are cultural things. That's what the CMMC is. We need to make sure that you have a culture of cybersecurity posture in the Department of Defense to work with us, because you're taking an inherent risk by doing work with the DoD in any federal entity, to be honest, because you become a target for the adversary. Well, that was the thought 10 years ago. Today, I believe everybody is a target for the adversary. And, that's why, wherever I can, I talk about CMMC is a cultural thing. And we are moving the Department of Defense. You see our budgets and what's happening to them. We're cutting our budgets. So we need to put more on industry to be compliant, because there just isn't money to do and I hate to use the word, but the free chicken. We can't do much because we don't have the resources. If we're ever going to get out of this deficit crunch that we're in, this nightmare, we have to be logical about how we're spending our tax dollars. And ultimately, CMMC saves the taxpayer a ton of money, because what we're losing every single day in the defense industrial base, because they don't have a good cybersecurity culture, is more than the Department of Defense spends in I would say probably half of the budget annually. We're losing through this. So it's a cultural thing to get the DIB in the same playing field as we make ourselves. I'm here to the NIST 53. I make sure every entity in the DoD is compliant to it. There's no variation. I don't give poems. I don't give exceptions to policy. So why should I do that for the DIB when I don't fight a war alone? So I'm hoping everybody, understands we're not going anywhere. The CMMC isn't going anywhere. It's here to stay. We're going to keep doing the things we do and evolving. If you're paying any attention to what I'm doing as the performing the duties of the CIO, I'm doing more to create third-party audits so that when you come into the government, you're ready to go. And I apologize. The 4-year delay was something that I never in my life thought would happen. And because it was such an imperative. And all I can say is thank you for hanging in there. I knew back in the day that industry would meet the demand signal if we kept it strong. I appreciate everyone, hanging in there. And for the cyber AB, the comments that were made when I first got on, which was like, I think I've been on for about 20 minutes listening, the ethics. And I want everyone to know really clearly and concisely, I'm the mommy of the CMMC. I was a civilian, government employee. I never would have taken a job in all of my life to do anything in the CMMC ecosystem. I was out of government for 4 years. I believed in it. And I promised you all from the very beginning that the ethics started with me and never varied. Never varied. So I appreciate the comments that were made about ethics in the cyber AB, because I think it's critically important for the government to create that trust relationship So massively, I'm back. We're going to talk about NATO. We're going to talk about what I see in a vision of where CMMC is a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. We're going to get through this. The time frame on the executive order halting all new regulations. We're coming out of that right now, so we're working through that process. I can't talk too much about that because we're just coming out of that process. But I think by fall we'll start seeing the RFPs. I know there are ones already in queue, and I'm not going to get ahead of myself and talk about those. What I would say is that I think it's going to be fast and furious, even though, and I will say the Biden administration and the last couple of months, I was paying a lot of attention. They wanted CMMC implemented super fast because they realized what was going on. We got into, the progression of the rule really sped up. If you weren't paying attention, and let's all give I commend the cyber AB and this community, this ecosystem, for staying the course. But I also would be remiss if I didn't stop and say that the PMO did the Lord's work. I will forever be indebted to those individuals on how they stayed the course. And every time there was something thrown at them, they figured out how to move around that. So once again, I'll say to my team now, once again, irony, isn't it? They moved CMMC to CIO, and now I'm performing the duties of CIO. When I was CISO A&S, it was in a different department, but that team stayed together and stayed the course. So phenomenal effort by Stacy Bosjenic and Buddy Dees and Diane Knight and Carrie Cardwell and Dawn Greenway back in the day. There were just so many amazing people, and John Choi in the very beginning. There's so many people in the government that believed in it. Jeff Spinnager, just unbelievable the amount of people that participated, and just they dug their heels in, and we wouldn't be here today without them. So I hope you all, when they come across them, you tell them thank you. But in the same vein, I ask you to thank the members of the AB. Matt jumped in on board, the original members of the accreditation body, and the challenges that we went through on that and creating that level of trust. It's just thank you all for staying the course. So she's not going anywhere. The CMMC is here to stay. We're going to be rolling her out. You're going to start seeing her in RFPs. I think the question everybody asked is, and for our sake in the government and for the industrial base sake, I'll say that, I've foot stomped that the major complaints that we get and have gotten and will continue to get isn't the cost of the CMMC audit. It's the cost of getting compliant to something you should have already been doing. And I'm trying to figure out ways to help in this economy. I'm trying to figure out ways. I know the department we don't want to lose contractors. So we don't want to lose our industrial base. That is not the intent of this. But I also know the reality is you watch a cyber posture of a company like Telefonica in Spain, because they had a misconfiguration. They didn't have a cyber culture, a cyber process, right? A misconfig happened, and look at what happens. Then at the same time, Kettering hospital systems, I don't know how many were paying attention yesterday, but they got hacked. And, the cyber posture of the medical community has always been something like I looked at in the very beginning of CMMC. If you think that it's not going to happen to you, if you don't have a cyber culture, you're dead wrong. It will. It's just a matter of time. It is a certainty. So, and I don't want you to go away. I don't want to lose any contractors. I want to maintain you, but I need to maintain the ones that are compliant, because I don't get any exceptions on compliance. And I have to stay that course for national security to defend you. You're the taxpayer. This is kind of ironic, right? The taxpayers who are trying to protect the national security, right? We're all part of this. And the cost of compliance is there. And I'm working on that internally in the department, what the cost looks like. But it's a challenge set, in all honesty, because the DIB didn't do it when the rule went out in 2014, 2015, and 2017. You did POAMs, You weren't actually building it into your rates. And it's hard for us to go back in government and say, I need more money in the budget now, because the DIB they weren't really serious about it. And it's a little bit of a paradox that we're going to work through. I want everyone to know I'm not backing away from it. I'm going to figure a way through it. We always find a way to yes. But that is a reality of, when I've had a budget or a program going and the recompete's coming up, and because the DIB wasn't doing the implementation side, their rates are changing. It's a hard justification for us in the Department of Defense. And I want you to know I'm fighting that battle, because I don't want to keep looking back. But I want you to know that the complexity of what we're doing here is not something that we take lightly. It's something we take very seriously, because you are our priority. We don't fight wars alone. We need the DIB, and we need the auditors. We need the ecosystem. One team, one fight. And we're at, Katie Arrington will say full stop. The non-kinetic adversarial actions, they're increasing. They're not slowing down. And I've been saying for years and years, what did we see in Russia and Ukraine? We saw the capability of non-kinetic impacts to heighten a kinetic impact. And what I mean by that is turning critical infrastructure on or jamming comms, the C2 side of the house, right? Before you launch a missile, so people can't move. They don't know it's coming. That's non-kinetic to impact and make a kinetic attack much more impactful. The non-kinetic attacks in the supply chain are about, creating malware and software. It's about creating counterfeits and HBOM in hardware. It's about creating ransomware. It's about creating, diversion and I would say disruptive technology. That's all got to be part of your cyber culture, right? Those are things we're trying to thwart. And CMMC is a building block of how we're hoping to build, bricks in your ecosystem to protect yourself. Things like, supply chain risk management, things like the SWIFT, the software fast track. We're doing everything we can to help you get to be the best that you can be, because you are that important to us. And I want to foot stomp that's the imperative. I have been a big proponent of, I don't ever want to speak Mandarin or Russian by mandate. If I want to learn it on my own, that's my own business. But I don't want to be in a place where I need to do it. It's a want thing. And the CMMC is part of, I would say the cyber defense and cyber offense for the Department of Defense. It's in every one of our strategies, having the DIB be secure. The National Defense Strategy, we talk about cybersecurity as one of the paramount, edicts in it, tenets of the National Defense Strategy. We've written it into the CIO, what we're doing to secure the DIB. I mean, we're not changing the course. So if industry is not awake and listening, that isn't because we haven't been loud and proud about it. Now, vision-wise, I said, I think it's going to get real sporty real fast, because program managers aren't going to want to assume the risk of not having compliance, because we're forcing that function in several areas. And I hope I can create, I started off this conversation with compliance, the conversation at NATO that standards are just a piece of paper until you're compliant to them. We've created third parties to help you get to compliance, to know where you really are in the eyes of the government. I'm working on ways to assist on bridging the delta between the past and the present. We are looking at outwardly CMMC building blocks. The PM in the executive order, if you weren't paying attention, on acquisition reform. Well, one of the portions of that is, how do we get innovation and how do we get acquisition to move faster? How do we get the barriers torn down? Well, the PM has a lot to do with that, the program manager, and how much risk they're willing to take, because that accelerates how fast you can award work. That accelerates how fast you can do work. So if you haven't connected the dots in that executive order, we're looking at how to reframe the way we look at our program managers. And compliance for them needs to be something that they can just look at, have a third party and say, I've got it. That's why we created the SWIFT program, software fast track, just like the CMMC, to create that accelerated acquisition life cycle to move things forward. So we want measures that the PM and the core or the contracting officer can have a third party audit, and they can make it more efficient. They can bring more lethality and more readiness. So I hope you all see that this is all part of a massive effort we're going through in the Department of Defense. It's all been very, I have to give credit to the authors of some of these executive orders, because it all connects to each other. And the executive order, I think we're I think we have another 60 days as we write acquisition reform into how we're going to do that. You've seen the DOGE come through. They're still in the Department of Defense. They're still looking at where we're losing money. And I can tell you from where I'm sitting, right, in the conversations I've had, they're keenly aware of what we lose through the defense industrial base without compliance. So as they're making compliance for the department, and they're making compliance for, our standards and interoperability, they're absolutely looking at the compliance, on what we're losing from people not doing, or companies, sorry, not people, not doing what they're contractually obligated to do. So I'm hoping I'm painting a picture that's really beneficial, right? Short-term hurt, long-term gain, making our country, the Secretary of Defense, SecDef, Hegseth, when he signed out in the first few days of his tenure, the software acquisition pathway. Remember, the core tenet of that pathway in the adaptive acquisition framework is cybersecurity. The core tenet of it is cyber, because I wrote it when I was CISO A&S. Our team actually wrote that part of the adaptive acquisition framework. So think about how this has all been looped through, and all of the pieces that are coming together to make this amazing puzzle happen over the course of 5 years. And we're here. And you've got not just, the department saying we're here, we're doing this. We have all these other policy and acquisition changes to make sure that we've got it to the right place. I'm hoping with all the efficiencies, the lethality, and the readiness that CMMC provides, we can regain some of what we have lost over the past few years. I think that our country we are definitely dominating in AI. We definitely have our challenges as post-quantum keys and encryption come out, because it's a competition, right? We're in a dead heat with our adversaries, and we're not going to let up, just like they're not going to let up. And we have got to be the best that we can be, so that we don't have that want of, the need and the want statement. I don't want to have to need to speak Mandarin. I don't want to have to need to speak Russian. I don't want to have to need to speak North Korean or Iranian. I want to be able to want to learn those languages, but I don't want to have to need them. So I hope that you can see that the picture of the Department of Defense and where we're looking out is very bold. It's, once again, you're in an administration of, we haven't been doing it right. What do we need to do to get it right? We are in an administration and a time of a cultural shift, which started off in the Trump 1 administration. We're here, cultural shift. The shift is cybersecurity is a cultural shift. Zero trust is a cultural thing. It is not a framework. We have got to adhere to the fact of secure by design. That is a cultural shift. DevSecOps, cultural shift. We're not going back. So what are you doing today to get ready? If I say the buzzer's already gone off. How can we help you? And how can we do and work to ensure that you get the resources you need, that you have the education and the training and the policies and the processes you need? That problem set won't be, we have multiple entities out there trying to solve the problem with, 300,000 people in the ecosystem. It's not an easy problem to solve, but I've never gone after anything. My mother said to me as a child, my sisters and I, if you want something, you will make it happen. Otherwise, you will make an excuse. And I've never made an excuse for this. I don't do it for myself. I don't do it for, my family. I don't do it for, my organization that I have the pleasure to serve at to serve the president. But ultimately, I work for the taxpayer, and I'm humbly appreciative of you allowing me to be in this role. But the role that I've been put in is to help get national security, to help ensure that our democracy is something that we understand is on all of us. It's not just the Department of Defense, right? You are the Department of Defense. You're a member of the Defense Industrial Base, or you're a taxpayer. And in either case, you own it. Don't you want to protect it? So I've given enough of my, standing on the red, white, and blue, because I do love this country more than words can even say, because I think that there's something to be said for an environment where the human entity, the human being, the individual's freedoms are so critically important. And I'm willing to die on that hill, just like so many others in our past have given their lives. And we're talking about complaining about being compliant to a requirement, a standard. And I'll leave you with my latest analogy, because Katie loves a good analogy. The beaches of Normandy, when those young men were sitting in those vessels off of the coastline, and it was freezing cold, the water was cold, it was choppy as all get out, it was horrible weather, the tides were not in their favor, they had limited ammo on them. They didn't ask for a poem. They didn't ask for an exception. They didn't ask for anything. They knew that if they didn't go in for the fight of their lives, that something greater than themselves was at risk. And our current deputy, Honorable Feinberg, his uncle was in the beaches of Normandy. He was there on D-Day. And he talks, and he's probably one of the most genuine people I've met in a very long time. I'm very privileged to work with such a great crew over in the Department of Defense. But he said this in one of my first meetings, and it's really stuck with me since coming back in the building. He said, my uncle didn't ask for anything, but what he did look for was the Southerner, because he figured he'd have a better chance of survival running up a beach, knowing behind somebody who's been running up them for a while. And that statement has really stayed with me. And when I think about that, and I think about what our forefathers and foresisters had given up and sacrificed for our freedoms, and I look at where, as businesses, we're looking around and saying, oh, there's not enough, resource to do this. There's not enough. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I don't know of a greater cause to fight for and to figure out the hard problems than you. And I mean that with the sincerity of my heart, than you. I work for you. And I'm doing this for you, for your families, for your future, for national security, as the same reasons you're doing it. And I just pray every day that you remember the sacrifices that others have made. And let's really consider, right, what happened in when the warfighter is there, that man or woman that has volunteered to protect our freedom, to protect our democracy. And they're banking on, because everything is software enabled now, everything has cybersecurity, everything. That's why the Secretary of Defense said in his first few days, the software acquisition pathway is what we should be. It should be the default pathway, because everything is software enabled. Everything has cyber in it. And that is the biggest vulnerability we have. I hope you all are reading behind the lines, the narrative here, folks. It's so critical. And the reason, Secretary Hegseth did that, the reason the president has let the executive orders out, is we want the regulations, the barriers that are there, but we also have to ensure compliance, and the cybersecurity of the country is an imperative. And it's a national imperative. We have to have it. It's not something we can trade off. If you all remember Delivered Uncompromised, and Bob Metzler, I'm not sure who mentioned Bob Metzler. And I will tell you that not a fun story, but a real story. Bob emailed me on April 17th. And I take his legacy and the work that he did. And his email was nothing more than gratitude for people that had the same vision, that had the same desire. And his last few days, he wanted to talk to me and just say, thanks, and don't give up. I mean, that's were his last words to me. Don't give up. It's worth the fight. And I think about Bob, I think about this industry and how you haven't given up the fight, the ecosystem, the cyber AB, the PMO. You guys deserve an award. And I'm just really grateful. So I'll stop talking on that note and let you ask a few questions of me while I have your attention. While I'm in Brussels, and I don't know if you can hear it or not, there's a protest going outside my hotel room. But I'm here for you. I'm grateful to you, but I'm not going to let up the pressure because you're worth it.
All right, thank you very much, Katie.
Do you have any questions?
So unless you're really, really loud, Katie will not be able to hear your questions. And we thank you so much for taking time to take some questions. We have two people in the lavender shirts who have microphones. So let's see some hands up. And Dimitri, right next to you, I think let's get some questions to you. Hopefully you'll be able to hear them with the microphone.
I'll put my ear.
Very good.
Very good. I'll try and be loud. So this is more of a theoretical question, and it gets to one of the root issues, and you addressed it a little bit, Ms. Arrington, and that is the cost of CMMC compliance and the process. In the early parts of this, back at CMMC 1, it was always stated that costs for compliance for an organization to become compliant could effectively be rolled into overhead rates, and you addressed that briefly in your talk. What we're seeing now, and this is why it's a theoretical question, DOE recently, as yesterday, put out a notice saying that overhead rates for for-profit and not-for-profit organizations are going to be capped at the de minimis rate 15%, which no longer would give the opportunity to recoup additional costs that would be indirect costs. Now, theoretical because, part of my job as CIO is to read the tea leaves of what 24 months from now is going to look like. With the flavor of the current administration, we are hearing rumblings that DOE policy in this space could drift to DOD.
Oh,
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So DOE doesn't have a whole lot of contracts, nor do they provide national defense. They're a regulatory body. They do not provide national security. So the capping of the rate there is something completely different, and it's completely title authority. Absolutely, we're different. But I will say that the narrative of DOE, we're working on capping rates because it's not necessarily the cost of cyber compliance that they're thinking that industry needs to get right on. It's the things like putting BD into your rate, business development. Why is the government paying for business development?
I agree
Those
with
are
that.
the questions those are what they're looking at. So when the DOGE, so I want you to hear me loud and clear, folks, right? There's got to be a right sizing of industry. And when you have, and I would say the smalls get the short end of the stick on this one, because they're working at the rates, they're not building in overhead like the large primes or I say the large smalls, right? But when you're working on overhead that the government's paying for, and you've got margins in smalls that are so slim, and you have margins in the primes, the large primes specifically, that is so massive, you've got to right size it. So what DOE is trying to do is right size that in their consulting and service agreements so that they're not paying for, and I've always been Katie. We don't need to pay in government, system integrators or OEMs. We in the government don't get to go on, elaborate, I'm not trying to dig on anybody. You run your business the way you want to, but there's a reckoning of what we can pay for and what we can't. And we can't pay for BD. Why are we paying for R&D? Why is the government building? So we pay for R&D in SIBRs and SITRs and OTAs. We're paying, but we're also getting it built into rates. Why is that? That's what DOE is doing. It's not about the cost of that compliance of cyber. It's the cost that everything else that we've gotten thrown in over the years into rates that isn't acceptable. Does that make sense?
Oh, and again, I certainly understand that position, and that's why theoretical question, maybe DOD doesn't consider this. Maybe 24 months from now, this isn't a situation at DOD.
And what I will say is, I think that it's going to be a right sizing, right? So what this administration is doing is we are taking risk, right? We're leaning in and saying, how are we going to right size the rates? How are we going to right size contracting? How are we going to right size that balance between government and contractor? It doesn't mean it's a permanent thing. We're trying to figure out the balance to make it efficient, lethal, right? And readiness. And things may change. They may come back and say, okay, that's too much, that's too low. Let's look at it. But if you don't ask the question and start, probing, you're never going to fix the problem. And I hope that makes sense, that we're looking for, how do we build the rates that are efficient, that we want everybody to be profitable. You have a president who loves the capital markets and wants people to be profitable, but at what cost, right, to the taxpayer? And that's an area where cyber is not going to be something that they sacrifice. They'll look at the rates and they'll say things like, why are we paying for business development? Why are we paying for R&D? When those aren't things that the taxpayer should be responsible for.
Appreciate the opinion.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. What we're going to do is we're going to alternate to the two sides of the room. And I don't know if we have online questions from the staff in the back, but you could, if we have any, we'll try to read them out. We have about 14 minutes left, so we want to get to as many people as possible.
Katie,
so with Richard on the right.
Can you give us the secret inside scoop on when 48 CFR is going to drop? We won't tell anybody, we promise.
I can't. I like I said, I'm an ethical little girl, and no. But I will tell you that we're moving the hold on the regulation. The EO that was holding that up not too long ago. That the relief was, that we had gone through that period. That's what I will tell you.
I'll compliment you on the bold question. And speaking of deadlines, I was there in 2019 at the first meeting of CMMC, and you actually said 5 years. And that was November 2019. So 2020 to 2025, when we're rolling out all the regulations and an entire ecosystem, it feels like it took a long time, but we're actually on Katie's schedule, in my opinion. So
we would be fully implemented by now, not starting off. But okay. Hey, I'll take a win. Get one.
I'm an optimist. Okay, let's go back to the stage right.
Hi, Katie. Yvette Burton here. We sure miss you, and it's good to hear your voice. I wanted to double. I was just going to. Oh, sorry.
Let me do this for the audience, right? Did everybody see my LinkedIn post? Da-na-na. Look who's back. Back again. I did do that when I got the nomination. Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to double click on your comment about culture. A lot of the conversations we've been having here, even those of us who understand the technical imperative of it, have talked about the challenge to build new skills, capabilities of how we lead, how we partner. Could you talk a little bit about your thoughts on what you see as critical for us moving forward when it comes to turning culture into how we partner, attitudes and behaviors that support the mission?
100. What a great question. I love that. So that was actually one of the biggest themes at the NATO this past week. And I was at Indo-PACOM, offset, but I was down in Indo-PACOM the week before. I've been on the week for, just so you all know, I've been on the road for 2 solid weeks. And I'm not in love with hotel beds. They are the most uncomfortable things. But when you're looking at people that you want to team with or partner with, look in the mirror and what do you like about yourself? And what are your strengths and your weaknesses? And I would say you need to partner with people that have that same ideology. And if they don't, it's people are, they're either going to get it or they're not going to get it. And this cultural shift has been going on, and at NATO, what we were talking about was, we have a culture of, we know we have this digital transformation. We know we have this. Well, if you don't get on my bus now, then I'm shutting the door and I'm moving on. So you have to have people that have the sense of urgency, that have the sense of getting to yes, right? If you have somebody that, and I said it in the beginning of this, statement, when my mother, you want something, you'll make it happen. Otherwise you'll make an excuse. Look for partners that find their way to yes. They're not the Eeyores of the room, right? They don't find every reason, right? Because you need people who are risk tolerant to partner with. You need entities, and why I say risk tolerant, right? Because to fix a problem, you've got to take a little risk. Now, where you take risk reductions in, you take risk reductions in having a good cyber posture. You take risk reductions in, having a financial, healthy financial, I would say not bank account, but culture, right? That you don't spend more than you make, right? Those are things. But you can take risk on innovation and technology. You can take risk on hiring, younger or people that have been in the industry and want to retrain. You can take some risk there. But where you can't take risks, you've got to find the people that have that same mindset, right? That where can we get to good on certain things that we're not today, but there are just basics that are non-negotiable. Would you buy a car without a seatbelt? No, right? Because that's a compliance thing. So why would you do work with somebody who didn't have the same posture, culture as you? Because in this environment, you are me. There's no difference, right? We're connected. So those are the things I look for. And when I meet people and how I look to engage, I look for people like me, because I'm loud, I'm going, I want to make a change, right? I want to partner with people that want to be like that. So I think those are things, right? And in leadership, I'll tell you the one narrative is, I love the fact that my office right now, the people that I get the pleasure to work with, function completely seamlessly without my presence. Because a good leader and a good teammate knows that to empower their partners to do the right thing, to empower the people that are experts to do the right thing, and to know that you're not I will say the last thing on this is, no, you're not the smartest person in the room ever. And it will serve your company and you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, do you all understand why we created Express Connect for you? Because you don't get that out of a handshake and a smile passing at a conference. We wanted to give you sessions where you could feel the culture of the organization that might want to serve you. And you don't get that on a quick pass. You get it by asking them good questions and making sure that they match up with you. So thank you for saying it better than me. I'd like to report to you, Katie. So Katie's on the screen. That's why I keep looking down, so I can see her face. But we did have a dinner last night. I know you're very proud of women's involvement in CMMC, and there'll be a picture on the big screen out front. But we had 55 women with a waiting list of CMMC at dinner last night. And for what I heard, it was quite an enthusiastic crowd. Like, you could hear them from a long way away. They were happy to be with each other and happy to be working together. So very proud of the fact that we are in the technology business, and so proud of the women who are doing such a great job. So, and I think you're part of the inspiration for that. Okay, let's go back to the right side. Yep.
So yeah, I appreciate that. And I am in technology, so I appreciate that.
Very good. Okay, stage left.
All right. Hey, Katie, Michael Gruden here, former Pentagon IT Acquisition Branch Chief and partner at Crowell & Moring. Great to see you, and thanks for all that you do. Question for you. Yeah, you're welcome. Question for you. In reviewing the 32 final rule, which we were also excited to see, I noted within that, I couldn't help being the pesky attorney and notice the reference to the Department of Justice and how in parts of the comments, it seemed like that there was coordination between DOD and DOJ, which I think is fantastic. In the era of the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative, what do you think are priorities for the DOD that they would want to communicate to industry to look at with regards to compliance? And I love your smile, by the way, at this question.
Because, so, we talk about that, and then we talk about the False Claims Act.
Yeah.
Right? There was a reason, right? So part of it is, and I'm going to go wide and deep on this answer. So brace yourselves. So and let's just take yesterday's Telefonica episode. If you're the Department of Defense and somebody didn't follow the processes and it cost you downtime, who's responsible? That business lost. Is it if somebody didn't configure their capability correctly, right? They said that they would do secure by design, or they would update a patch, or they had this processes, and it cost you money, who would be responsible?
Anybody from?
So why is it so if you think about the CMMC, she might be used for cyber insurance as an evaluation factor, but it's also a protection. If you say you get third party audited, something happens, it helps you as a company say, I've got the processes and audited, this is what happened. But without it, you're liable, right? That's what we're thinking, is somebody's got to start paying for non-compliance, and the taxpayer can't keep paying for it. That's kind of moving in that direction. I hope that makes sense. When you have people, and I'm not saying, I wasn't forensically there on Telefonica, but when I heard it was a configuration error and you've lost your business for a day, the insurance companies that, you have business and continuity insurance, right? So who's responsible in that business, that insurance company's mind, who's responsible for that business loss? Is it the company or is it the provider? And that's where we are, right? And when we're in a non-kinetic war and things like that happen, that's what they're talking about. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. I think that should also speak to we don't talk a lot about level one. We have 220,000 companies, last estimate on level one. But there's level one, the self checklist, and there's level one when you get a third-party provider to come in and look over your shoulder. And that does give you some insulation when things go south. And I think that it can be used that way. And I think there's not enough, personally, there's not enough discussion about that. And there's a lot of opportunity to secure the supply chain, even one level down at level one. Let's go back to stage left. And we have 3 minutes left in Katie's time, so we might have one more.
Aloha, Katie. It's Larry Lieberman. And I have a question about some implementation so OSCs can better understand these timeframes. In the recent waiver memo, there's a statement stating that CMMC level 2 self-assessment will only be required for selected contracts. And in the language of the implementation schedules in CFR, it says that in phase 1, that all applicable contracts will require level 1 and level 2 self-assessment. So can you speak to how many self-assessments for level 2 are expected upon effectiveness of 48 CFR? Is it going to be all applicable contracts, or is it going to be some? What should people expect?
I would say this: if you're working on a program that has anything to do with high-level national security, you're going to be held accountable. If you're working on a program that provides, I would say, moderate risk, that might apply. But otherwise, I mean, that was the caveat, right? But if you're working on a high-risk program, there's no way around it, because it's we're losing.
So will CUI handling contracts require a self-assessment upon effective date of 48, or only after the first phase after a year?
Ooh, you know what? I'm not going to try and pretend that I don't know that answer. I know that answer off my cuff. The expert on that is Boss Janik, and she'll be on tomorrow afternoon. I'm in the 48, but I'm not that would be an area I know what I don't know, and that's a Boss Janik question.
Thanks so much.
And Boss
I'm on.
Janik will be here tomorrow, so you can ask it again.
And you know what you can, Mark, if you want to shoot that question to my email, and you can give that answer back before morning. I just want to double check I think I know my response, but I don't want to speak out of turn, and I'll get you an answer that you can tell first thing in the morning at the conference.
Okay, thank you.
How's that?
That's service with a smile from your government.
Well, I work for you, so I might respond to your question.
Stage left,
And
Richard.
Wait, can I make one
Yes,
statement? And this
please.
is thought, right? And we've got the president questioning what CUI, is it really valid, right? And what I'm going to say to you guys, I've said for 5 years, it's not the program, it's the compilation. It's the compilation, right? And I think that that's going to evolve. CUI, unless we get to and I will say CDAO, the new CDAO in the Department of Defense, Doug Matty, if you don't know him, holy bananas. I love this guy, right? And I think that where we're going to get to, if you're asking Katie Arrington on CUI, between data labeling and data tagging, instead of it being the PM's decision, I think that in very near future, and I would say in the very near future, meaning, within 18 months, I think that you're going to start seeing classification based on the labeling and tagging, where AI will counterbalance in advance of a program manager saying, this is CUI. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And I don't think that going forward, AI will be able to determine, right, what demonstrates CUI. And I think you're going to see more contracts having CUI than before, because we're using AI instead of the human. And we're training those models, right, to look at if you've labeled and tagged data this way, and it's going into this package, AI will make that determination. So I think you're going to see more contracts with CUI, just because I don't think we've had a great handle on it to date, because it's been, it's been somewhat, I don't want to say murky, but it's been a little bit not as clear as it should be.
And I would say, since you mentioned AI, we see a lot of AI starting to get into our exhibit hall and our Express Connect. People are thinking about ways to make this whole process more efficient and put people to their highest and best use, and the AI to the lower use. Yes.
The AI was something, of course, I didn't think about AI in this well, I thought that business would create processes to lower the cost. But between the confliction of, there's never a mistake or a coincidence, right? Did COVID happen at the right time in the CMMC development that AI leaped ahead in that time frame? I mean, imagine, so the tools and capabilities the industry and the ecosystem are creating with AI did not exist 5 years ago. So costing, how to use the tools in the right way. AI is definitely, I didn't know it was AI. I thought it was just be streamlining businesses process. I don't want to pretend that I can see into the crystal ball, but it couldn't have coalesced at a better time, and get better outcomes, right? And I'll also say for the providers, there's been, cybersecurity as a service. I know there are entities out there that are getting, getting you requirement ready, right, for using CSPs and et cetera, for a much lower cost of getting compliant to being audited than we ever thought possible. So I'm just going to say the use of AI, the tools, and entities looking at innovation have drastically reduced that cost of getting compliant to their requirement. I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. We ran a little bit over, and just for the audience, the mother of CMMC, Katie Arrington.